Guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be talking about surge protection. Okay, slightly different, and it's off the back of our introduction of our new Type 1, Type 2 SPD. So Type 1 and Type 2 SPDs, or Type 1 SPDs especially, have a completely different installation requirement than your standard Type 2. And they're actually required on an awful lot more installations than you probably realise. Okay, now, they can be quite complicated or seem quite complicated, so what I've done in this video is I've simplified what each does, where you need to fit them, when you need to fit them, and what a Type 1, Type 2 can do for you. Okay, now just before we go any further, I would like to say a huge thank you to everyone that has already subscribed to the channel, and if you haven't already, if you could do me an absolute solid and just click that button, that would mean the world, and I really do appreciate it. So let's get straight into it. So surge protection can sound very complicated. There's lots of terminologies. Where do I put things? There's also a lot of myth and rumor around what you can and can't do, what's best practice and what's not. And BS 7671 does offer quite a few guidance on it, but as always, there's a little bit of grey in there left for interpretation. So what I've done here is I've stripped it right back and made it as simple as possible so we can all understand it and crack on, essentially. So without further ado, let's get straight into this video. So realistically, there's only two types of jobs that surge protection really does that we're worried about, because Type 3 goes on the appliance and it's a very different. Most of them in that sense, when they're required, are probably built in. But Type 1 and Type 2, okay, now you're familiar with Type 2. You've seen Type 2, you're definitely fitting Type 2 because they come pre-fitted in most consumer units up and down the country already. And they are designed for transient voltages within the home, things generated from switching, motors, and modern electronics, okay? And what they do is they sit within your consumer unit and protect those appliances and products that are attached to the circuits within the home. So that's its job. But Type 1 is a bit different. Type 1 protects the supply. Now, think of Type 1 as like a bodyguard or like a doorman, big old bouncer that sits in front of the door, and in our case here, the main supply, to stop any unwanted entry of surges, okay? Just like the riffraff you don't want in the club or in the pub, this bad boy stops those big surges on the main supply, even getting to the board, by safely then transmitting them to Earth. The most common big bad boy surge that you're going to get is, unsurprisingly, from things like lightning strikes, okay? That is one hell of a bolt of energy, okay, on any supply. Now, please don't get it twisted. If a bolt of lightning strikes your home without lightning protection within the property, which is uncommon on a domestic property anyway, it ain't going to make a blind bit of difference. So let's just put that there. A Type 1 SPD is not going to save your house from essentially exploding if lightning hits it, okay? So I'm not saying that. But what it will do is protect that surge coming up the supply and coming into your home, potentially causing massive damage. So this is where Type 1 is now quite important, okay? So domestically speaking, the biggest issue with lightning strikes will be overhead lines, okay? So essentially that massive surge can travel through that overhead line and into the property. So based on BS 7671, it does recommend that a Type 1 SPD is fitted in any property or properties with overhead lines. There are also some other properties, larger commercial buildings and properties with lightning protection devices in place. So in those sorts of situations, a Type 2 just doesn't have the muscle to deal with that surge and safely dissipate it to Earth. That's why you would need a Type 1 before the board, essentially. So it has to, so this is the bit that you need to be aware of. The positioning of the SPD within a Type 1 is far more important than a Type 2. So a Type 2 is absolutely perfect for within the subboard. It can be in a main board sometimes. Even three-phase supplies, a lot of them are absolutely adequate with a Type 2 surge protection in them. I think most people do supply a three-phase board with a standard Type 2 SPD associated. I know our new range that's coming in the new year as standard, is fitted with a Type 2 SPD device, and that's absolutely fine. It's about understanding how the power comes into the property and the susceptibility of it to lightning surges, essentially large surges of big energy. Think back to the bouncer, okay? So, to summarize very quickly, if you have an underground supply in a standard house with no special requirements, you are usually looking at a Type 2 SPD as your standard baseline protection. 9 times out of 10, it'll be found in the main board and sometimes in the sub-board on a long run, for example. If you have an overhead supply, or the building is part of a lightning protection system, or the specification calls for a higher grade of surge protection, that's when you need to bring Type 1 into the picture at origin. And this is where a Type 1, Type 2 unit like this one makes a lot of sense. Because instead of juggling 2 devices, you can now put all of your SPD protection into one unit. The Type 1 side of this device will take care of those big lightning surges, whilst the Type 2 part of this device will take care of the everyday stuff left over. So now comes into a completely different topic that has been, I wouldn't say it's been ongoing, I think people have become a little bit more accustomed to it now, but placement of SPDs. Now, whilst a Type 2 SPD unit can essentially be fit anywhere in that consumer unit because it's being fed from a buzz bar through an MCB if you're following best practice. I know some do sit straight on the buzz bar as well. But it doesn't really matter where you place that SPD within the board, especially because of the way it operates and the transient voltages that it's dealing with. You've also got to understand that these things work in nanoseconds rather than milliseconds. So I physically couldn't evidence how quickly these things move. But a Type 1, because it's protecting the main supply in, unlike its Type 2 brethren, is really important. You cannot put this unit, for example, on the inside of your main switch like you can do a Type 2, because it has to protect the supply coming into the board. Okay? So at very least, you'd be looking at placing this particular unit, okay, in front of that incomer, that 100 amp incomer, looping it then using your live conductor in to what we consider is a 63 amp MCB. So alongside our Type 1, Type 2 SPD, you'd be fitting a 63 amp B-curve MCB. Okay, and then the setup is very similar to what you would see as a traditional SPD setup. SPD, main switch, MCB for the main switch, and everything looped and wired in correctly. However, even better practice would be fitting that Type 1, Type 2 SPD in front of the consumer unit rather than inside it, and shortening the distance between that incoming supplier and the SPD as much as you physically can. That way it can deal with that surge as quickly as possible, sending it to Earth as safe as possible. So I hope that's cleared up a little bit of where and when and if you need them. And like I say, an awful lot of overhead line installations, believe it or not, are still being fitted with only having a Type 2 SPD at the board. You would need a Type 1, Type 2. It's a very easy fix. It's not cheap, but you can omit the actual Type 2 at the same time. So whilst you are adding cost, if you were to buy a Type 1, Type 2 unit, you're only adding the Type 1 to it. It's essentially, there's no way around it. It's more expensive. However, you are adding an extra layer of surge protection. What's more expensive than putting the right SPD in place is seeing that surge hit that board and taking out everything in the house. Now, if you've got any questions about this, you can either contact us, we're happy to help, or like I would always recommend is contact the guys at Surge Protection Devices. They have a fantastic range of CPDs and other things on their website, and Kirsty and the team over there are always working hard to educate people on what the best type of surge is. Whilst we only make 2, there are absolute multitudes of different types of surge protection devices for different types of installations. So whilst we'll make the most common one for domestic installations currently, because that's where our focus is on our consumer units, if you want to know more about surge protection and really understand the variety of it, feel free to head over to them and ask them for a little bit of support. And make sure you're fitting the right SPD to keep you out of trouble every time. Guys, Thanks as always. Please remember to like, subscribe, share, and feel free to leave your feedback in the comments. And wherever I can, I will always try and help. And until next time, guys, remember the joys in the journey and take care.